come together to hear from 4 amazing women this morning. We have Lutricia Calaire, Dr. Patricia Stewart, Monifa Johnson, and Paula Cole Jones, who will be sharing with us this morning. And so I invite the rest of you to either use your gallery view or speaker view so that you may enjoy these women as they share a conversation. I invite them to unmute.
Teresa, you had gone on mute, so we missed the last piece of what you said.
Apologize.
Yeah, also we welcome Stephanie Spencer into our conversation.
Our own Stephanie Spencer will join you as well. That's wonderful. Thank you, Stephanie. And I will turn it over to you, ladies. I believe we're going to start with a meditation this morning.
Yes. Good morning. Welcome to this conversation. And we started with an invitation to center yourselves, to settle yourself into this experience. We ask you to just relax into your body and notice your breathing into the count of 4 and out to the count of 7. Just settle into your body and your breathing in preparation for this experience. And as you do so, I invite you to think about or bring to mind, bring into your mind's eye and think about who is responsible for your being here today. And think about your ancestors, those who came before you. Which of them would you call into the room and invite their spirit to be present with you as we do this work today? Now, some of our ancestors came on the Middle Passage. Some came across to Ellis Island. However, they came here, and whatever they brought with them lives in you. And as we think about this issue of race and racism and white supremacy, consider what gifts they gave to you that enables you to be here today and have this experience. And some of those gifts may not necessarily have been positive ones, but it helped awaken you to an issue that became your concern. So I want you to breathe into their memory, bring their images and their spirit here, and invite them to be present as we do this work. I think about my great-grandmother. I think about my grandmother. I think about and remember the images of the slave women who came through on the Middle Passage. I think about great leaders. Phyllis Wheatley, a poet. Mary McLeod Bethune, educator. Septima Clark, activist. Rosa Parks, activist. Viola Liuzzo, organizer. Coretta Scott King, activist. There are many women who have done great work, and they are our ancestors, and we honor them here today. And know that whatever we learn and whatever we do going forward, we will pass on to our ancestors and those who come behind us, whatever we have learned. So just take a few minutes, think about the beautiful people who came before you, who helped you get here today. And even if some of those messages were not the most positive ones and the ones you wish maybe you had not heard, just know that they were as essential to your learning as anything else. We're all here as learners and teachers, and we can appreciate them for that. We'll breathe into those memories. Breathe into the spirit of those people who are with us today. And when you feel ready, open your eyes and join us in this space.
Thank you, Latricia, for the centering as we begin our conversation. And I want to thank Latricia also for collaborating as we thought about how we would frame our conversation. So the first question is, given the challenges that we are facing today, the pandemic, racial unrest, an unsettling election, poor economy, climate change, and more. What are your thoughts about the power of Black women and other women of color to address these problems? And also with the limitations of all of this being virtual, I just invite the ladies on the panel to just speak up and let's get the conversation started. I'll start by saying that these problems are all very complex and they're urgent and they need many, many people in order to be resolved. In fact, as I think about that, we really are talking about changing a way of life as a part of changing the society and the structures. As Black women, the ongoing care of our families and communities has been a concern from generation to generation. I think that we know some things, from our experience, from the history that's been passed on to us. We know some things about solving problems and solving problems in a way that are inclusive. So not just solving for one part of the family or community, but inclusive. And we know it on a gut level, whether or not a space is inclusive for us. And so I know I work from that space to work so that whether we're talking about practices and rules or whether we're talking about space, I work so that it's a space where I can belong and where I think other people from my community and family can also belong. And so with that as a starting point, let me invite other women into the conversation. Anifa, I can't hear you. I see you talking.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I tend to kind of say things just rather bluntly and just put it out there. What's different? Black women throughout history in this country have had to deal with a variety of these challenges in one shape, form, or another since we've been here. And especially with the centering exercise where we start talking about our ancestors or thinking about our ancestors. I had a great aunt who injured a leg when she was a child, lived on Defusky Island, where it was disconnected from the mainland of the US. And she did everything she wanted to do on one leg, advocated for her people, was called the mayor of Defusky, and traveled all over the United States and drove a car. So you make it happen. And again, and the thing is, what I am glad to see in the more recent generations is that Black women have started saying, and women of color, that we need self-care as well, because we've been super women for a long time. And for many people throughout generations, it's everything from being mammy or the head of the house, even during the antebellum period, taking care of master's children and trying to then save something for when we got back to the slave quarters for our own. So again, we have the resilience and the wealth of just strength that Black women have had to, basically, we have had to garner or create or bring, cultivate in order to survive in this country. And in many regards, putting ourselves last. And so the real switch now is that for a lot of women, we're now saying self-care is important, and we do have to take care of ourselves and each other as women as we move forward. So again, the challenges have always been there, and we have always found ways to try to preserve, persevere, and take care of our families, and take care of our communities, and take care of other people's families and communities too at the same time.
I agree with Manif. I was just thinking about my ancestors, and one of the messages that I've gotten from my grandmother and my aunt in particular, as well as, even though I never met my great grandmother, it's a message I've got that we will be marginalized, and we have to make our own place on the table. We're not going to be asked, and in order to, we have a gift to offer, and that gift is one that we have to honor and know our own worth, and be able to advocate for it. And I think it's been always something that claiming our space, and it can get exhausting sometimes to claim our space. But I grew up with the idea that no one was going to claim it for me. I had to do it. And my aunt was a big pusher of that I had a space and I had something to offer. I also remember, I'm a social worker. When I was in grad school, I believed that as an African-American woman, that I had something to offer to the field of social work. I was quickly reminded by my intern supervisor that we were to follow a mainstream set of core values, and that I did not have that. And I challenged him on that. So hopefully I'm making some sense here, but I had to claim that space. And then I also had to have the wisdom that I was a student, and still make my own mark. And I'm still trying to get my own, so to speak, so that I can make a mark. You have to know that balance as well. But I'm grateful for the women in this room. That's been my healing source, to know that there's a time and a place in order to be effective, as well as self-care. And so I really appreciate what was already said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pat Stewart here, Patricia Stewart, Patty. Those are all names I've carried with me from birth, and different women are responsible for me being able to own those different names. And as I listen, I've come back home. I grew up in a very small industrial town in Ohio. And I never met I had no Black professionals within my life, the circle of my life. I didn't know a Black teacher. I didn't know, I had a Black physician and a Black dentist who was 8 miles away. So there was not this intentional aspiration to go be somebody, but there was an intentional aspiration to be loved. And there were 3 women in my life every day until I was 18, my aunt, my grandmother, and my mother, each with such different personalities and different senses of perseverance and how you lived in the community. But there was always a sense of living in the community and coming home with it. But as I listen and hear, the one thing that I want to keep repeating is I always felt well loved. Whatever their struggle was, I didn't have a name for it as love. I grew into understanding that it was love. And so as an individual, I thought I could think that was my understanding. But I have still in my life what I call my womb sister. Her mother and my mother lived next door to each other, and she was born 4 months before we were 4 months before I was. I rediscovered her maybe about 6 months before COVID, and we started talking. And her first thing that she said to me is, "Patty, your grandmother loved everybody." And that means she took care of people and they felt loved when she took care of them. And so with that taking care, there was always this sense of you will take your heart and mind somewhere that you make sure you're going to love well and that people will know that they can love back. And so leaving that small town to come south was just an experience that I really never fully appreciated until I came here to Georgia 25 years ago. The migration trek that they took crisscrossed the whole United States, from Ohio, Illinois, Colorado, back to Ohio. And so I've just begun to understand how difficult that was for them and how they had to be so subversive and at the same time fluid enough to get out of the way of everybody else. So what I'm saying is that the wanting to be somebody was knowing that you could be with somebody. And as I said, we didn't grow up with professional women and men, but we grew up with women who created organizations in those days that were women's clubs. And I pulled out a picture the other day that I'm in a picture of their annual summer event with 4 or 5 of us little girls and all of these other women standing about. So my sense of what do we do in this world is how do we become what we want to deliver and what we want to give in terms of our spirit and our hearts and minds. And it is very embodied. Our bodies must be ready to take the toll and give out the gold of that. Because Black women have done that we just heard how many different ways. And so when I listen and look at you, I'm so pleased to be here and to think at this point in my life, I can look at you and think of how many different ways your life has come into mine and how I've been enriched by that and how I hold on to it so that I can recognize it in somebody else when they come along. What we choose to do to make a living is vast. What we choose to do to make a life is really up to me. And so in order to do that, it is about caretaking. It is also about caretaking and growing into the humility of that. And that's hard, or it's challenging. Because I was listening to Monifa, I had to take a look at how I would go into speech or into a room where people were talking and be restless because they weren't saying things that I thought must be said. So this is an opportunity for me again to emphasize that I'm here because I was well loved.
Thanks.
So, yeah, I think a lot about my great-grandmother because my great-grandmother died at the age of 15. She died in childbirth after having been raped by the white man, her master or whoever he was. And so whenever I do that, bringing the spirit of her into the room with me, he comes too. And that's been difficult for me. But what I come away with is how incredibly strong she was, because she brought my grandmother into the world, and my grandmother, because she did not have a mom or a dad, lived most of her life as an orphan, going from place to place because you didn't have social services and child welfare and all those things that that we know about. I too am a social worker like Stephanie, so I know about those things. But I reflect on the incredible strength it took for them to survive the challenges that they survived, and what it brings to me as their daughter. You know, what gifts and strengths and skills have I developed to help move forward the world I believe in? And so when I hear Pat talk about, you know, the strength of the women she grew up with, I think about that. When I hear Stephanie talk about her aunt, who she learned a lot from, there are all these women in our lives, these people in our lives, who have given us incredible strength. And I think the biggest one, or at least in my life, the most important one, is what Pat talks about, which is you love people. And I think that was the only thing Black women and other women of color could do, because everything else had been taken from them. Everything else. They could not reach for wealth. They couldn't reach for education. So what women of color, what Black women learned to do was love in spite of it, which is incredibly strong. You love even when people are beating you down and terrorizing you and raping you and taking your children. You love no matter what. And it is that love, I think, that will move us forward. I believe that women will be the group that transforms this country. And I think Black women and women of color will lead that.
Yeah. Let me add to that, that aspect of loving. Along with that is also being able to define yourself and not being defined by the circumstances around, because people will define you in ways that do not give you that sense of agency that we're talking about. And I think that that's an important part of it too. How would you describe the relationship between progressive white women and Black women and women of color? How would you describe the relationship on this progressive end among women? And I agree with Tricia. I think if women were to really, really get together and do what's in the best interest of our families and communities, that we could change the conditions in this country. You know, we're raising children, we're teaching, we're in so many different aspects where we have influence, that if we really were to take this seriously, we could change the outcomes. And with that, I want to say that the organizing that started, well, that happened as a result of the 2016 election, led to the largest number of women in the Congress that we've ever had in our history. And I'm kind of impressed by, there are countries where there are a certain number of seats on the parliament, or there are their elected bodies have to be filled by women. This country needs a whole lot more women in leadership in order to bring some of these special, it's not just gifts, they're characteristics that women understand. I think about collaboration and resolving problems that way that this country needs a whole lot more of. But we're kind of stuck in these systems around power and privilege that are preventing women from having the kind of influence that we could. So what do you all think about the relationship between progressive white women and Black women and women of color?
Well, quite frankly, I've been disappointed in those relationships. And because I have to really be clear about the source of my disappointment, but I don't know that I have felt the deep commitment from progressive white women that I have felt from Black women and other women of color. And I don't think yet that we developed a way to have a conversation about what matters to us as women. And I've often felt that, and I think this is one that must be resolved, and I will own that it is just me. I'm not claiming this for anybody else. But I sometimes feel that when progressive white women have an option of either stepping up or stepping back as it suits them. But I don't know that Black women and women of color have that option.
Mm-hmm.
And so in many ways, the question is, will you hang with us when the going gets tough, remains unanswered. And that, I mean, I included Viola Liuzzo in the meditation because she was a white woman from Detroit, Michigan, who came to Freedom Summer and died. So I don't discount the work that many white women have done, but as a group and as a collective, the conversations that we must have between those who must be in and must hang in and those who have the option, we haven't had yet. And so I'm hoping and wishing that we do that work and begin to form the powerful coalitions that I think we can have to build a powerful movement of women. I think women are going to decide this next election. But my question is, when it really gets tough and it really gets down to it, what will those women who have the option to either go or stay, what will they do? I don't have the option to go. I must stay. White women have an option. And I don't know yet what they will do for the most part. So I have some disappointment and I also have some hope.
On that a little bit. And this also dovetails from the initial question as well about some of the challenges. I have to separate things between the personal and the systemic. So when I'm dealing with personal, interpersonal relationships with people and who's in my circle and in my life and the friends and around me, that's one aspect because the systems affect your personal. But then when we're challenging the systems and the methodologies and analysis and things that we use to articulate about racism and sexism and ageism and all of those things, I have to put on a different hat and address it from a different perspective. One of the things when it comes to working with progressive white women is that and I'm about to say Pat Collier because that's how.
Okay, say Pat, it's okay.
Yeah, what she's is speaking to, that idea of kind of, I don't know that separation or having to make that distinction is the same for white women as it is for me as a Black woman as I move in America. I have to make that distinction because I have white friends, but and my white friends, make no mistake, are progressive and they are doing the work because I have to be authentic all the time. That is a promise I've made to myself. So in order for some people to befriend me or to be a colleague or just an ally, I have to be authentic. So so they have to do some work to just even be around me, because I'm going to say what I feel. I'm going to tell you the truth. I refuse to wear the mask. And in the professional work, or in this, in the systemic work, working on trying to undo the racism and stuff, that is always the place that I'm in. And from a professional perspective, I'm approaching it from a analysis and a methodology where I have to specifically deal with issues that I may not choose to deal with on a personal level. So for white women who are doing the work, the progressive white women who choose to do the work, that means they're your allies in politics or in dealing with social issues in your community. There's a distinction, as I said, that there's no separation for them. They don't have to, in their personal lives, potentially deal with it in the same way, with their husbands, with their parents, with their in-laws, with their uncles and aunts. Again, that mask that I talk about refusing to wear, again, I don't even think that for some progressive white women that they even understand that there is a mask that they are wearing, and they can take it off with me when we're friends, or in certain settings, or when we're doing some work in certain settings, but then that mask goes back on. It's like there's a mask there too. So it speaks to the trust issue. And that's why the idea of building relationship or friendship, or how do we create this coalition when we choose when we have this major trust issue. So I think I touched on a few things there, but
Yeah.
Interesting enough, I was told that I could wear a mask because of my fair skin, from a multicultural family, but that's actually not true. And like Manifa, I refuse to be something that I'm not. I had to claim again my space and be authentically myself. And I would often test the waters with my progressive white female friends and colleagues to know whether you were going to stand there in the difficult times, to know whether you were going to falter on issues that really, really mattered, and particularly while we're talking about our children being targeted at an alarming rate. Implicit bias, people are going to sit here and tell me that it doesn't exist. I've been told that. Those are kind of the things that the words that came to my mind initially was complex, because there's a personal level, and restored faith and hope. But also disconnected was the other word that came to mind. Certainly on a global level, it's a huge disconnect. I don't see the connection there. I don't see the collaboration, or really the standing up for the injustice on a national level from white progressive women. I just don't see it. And maybe I'm missing something, but on a personal level, I do. And it is hard to trust. So that's why I just kind of put it all out there right from the rip, because when it comes to, I need to know if I have an ally or not.
just have a think, do you have a friend? Because I have people who tell me it's hard to be your friend. So how we gonna get to be allies if we can't, we can't even really be friends? And sometimes, hey, I don't need you to be my friend, and I just need you to be the ally. And some people take offense to that as well. I don't need to love you. We don't have to be friends for me to be a champion for your equality and my expect that you be a champion for mine as well. We don't have to. We can not be friends. So then how do we then build a trust as allies? Because as I said, I've had people tell me it's hard to be your friend because again, I'm going to be authentically me.
Yeah. And silence is not okay.
Exactly.
The indifference and the silence is just, it's not okay when we're talking about humanity.
Yeah.
And it's another way of being marginalized.
Yep.
I wonder what white women would say a progressive white woman is. I mean, I've not had experiences with white women who are progressive in the meaning of that. And I think it's what I'm describing is that they come in, it's like the public health model. They come in at the level of normality. But if it says something, there has to be an intervention or it looks like it's real deep, they can't get to that level. But normality and progressive, for me, what I've seen, not as a collective, as an organization, but individually, is that there's the sense of progressive with white women is that I know Black women. I know some of the things that I've done the caretaking, I've done the charity, I've done the showing up at meetings where we ordinarily don't show up. What I've found is if they were even saying I'm a progressive woman, is they haven't suffered enough to admit, they haven't admitted that they have suffered. So to be able to step into our own pain and stay in the presence of other people with intentionality and doing something about it. For example, we've all described situations that I've heard that are painful and admitted to it. It gets so buried. And when a woman rises up and says, I'm a progressive, that is a political term for me. And I mean it in the sense that they declare they've got a certain amount of power. And when you just gave the statistics for people being in Congress, there's a real difference between the women who are there to make a change from what is not to what is not happening to make it happen, versus there were 13, I think, Republican women that went in, and probably 4 or 5 times that of the Democratic women. But we've got women who have political presence and power who still adhere to the constitutional sense that we are only 3/5 of a person, and other issues that women bring to the table, whatever it is, because they've been left out, they're not taking that. And so I see white women that we can stay in that will stay in the room with us when we say we've got a project. I don't see that many white people who stay in the room with us when we say we have a mission and it is directed right now to the inequities. If we even say a group of people, it is the inequities that people of color and Black people have to endure in terms of even being healthy. Even if you find one place for them to join that, it gets real difficult. So I feel that, and for us to be talking this way, I don't want to leave out that we have a very different kind of sense of connectedness and gathering. I would like to emphasize that where I can see progressive women is to be in this room with you all in your Sunday service. How many Sunday services do you know white people put together and they do it like this? I mean, just think about it. And that is the greatest elephant in the room in this country. And that is whatever people do on Sunday morning or whatever day they use for their faith day. That's the greatest elephant in the room, because that is what drives their sense of being on the earth to do what they want to do with people.
Yeah, I think a fundamental question that white women must ask and come to grips with is their relationship to the privilege that is given to them, and how that privilege plays itself out when they are in a movement in which we are seeking deep systemic change, because the deep systemic change that we're asking for may alter their privilege. So what is it that white women are willing to lose in order to pick up and gain connection and community and relatedness? What is it that white women, what is the shame and the guilt that they must overcome, and as Pat said, face, before they can join us with any integrity? Other than that, without that deep consideration of their position on the planet and how white supremacy has affected them in their lives, being able to understand their own oppression and being willing to work toward the common good, is a reflective place that progressive women must be, because it just can't, yes, as Pat said, we'll do, there's some projects and there's some things that we will do, and we'll do a voter registration drive. We'll even go to an anti-racism workshop. But when it comes to really committing yourself emotionally and psychologically and spiritually to a movement that changes things, even you and even your circumstance and even your community, that's where the rubber hits the road. And those are the conversations that we're not having. What does it mean for women to build a movement that causes deep, systemic, and profound change in this country?
Yeah. And Pat Stewart said the word that I think we all hold at the center, and that is inequity. We're dealing in a society that has built-in inequities. And when we struggle, when we fight, women of color, we will bring everyone home, and not just a fight for ourselves. It's not just a fight for Black people. When Black people win, everybody wins. And that's the thing around the issue of trust. We don't know that other people would fight that same fight, right? But I want to start to bring it to a close and ask, what are your sources of emotional, psychological, and spiritual support? Because it does take a lot of labor to do, just to exist in the world and to do the kind of work that we're doing. I want to start by saying, for me, family is central. And if my family is okay, then I can be okay, and I can be free for some of these fights and struggles. And when we look at the threat to families, I was just looking at some things about there was a decision made not to hear or entertain more conversation about the Tamir Rice killing. We're talking about a 12-year-old Black boy who just gets gunned down without the person who took his life giving any thought to who he was or his circumstances or anything. Is that constant threat that's there to family makes it hard to just be okay. And at the same time, there are plenty of stories and examples of people who have made contributions and who have overcome obstacles, and those serve as constant sources of inspiration. So for the other ladies, where do you go for your sources of emotional, psychological, and spiritual support?
Paula, I do agree that we are running low on time. So ladies, we do invite you to share, but know that we're about 2 minutes away from needing to wrap up today.
Well, I can say, you know, family, but I know where I come from. I know the people that got me here, and I think about them all the time. And so I honor and praise them. And so that's where I get mine. And of course, my life as a spiritual being.
Yeah.
I
Manifa, how
would
about
say
you?
also family.
Mhm.
I'm sorry.
Family's big, with one caveat for a lot of women in my generation. A lot of Black women are single, never married, no kids. So we're having to
Mhm.
read, you know, and that's the circumstances of the challenges in this country. And we are trying to redefine some things for us moving forward, especially as we lose our parents, where that wellspring's going to come from, because family is such a big thing. So yeah, my generation's dealing with that.
I'm just gonna
Yes,
say I
I
got a big
agree. I want
family.
to,
I don't have a family by birth, but I make other people's mothers' children and my family. So I've got a huge community family that is very comforting for me.
I just wanted to add, in this room, I have of the panel is a source for me. I have a peer, and I have 3 mentors that I see at different times have been key in my life, and in keeping me rejuvenated and keep moving forward. Besides just my ancestor roots, just wanted to add that.
Okay, well, thank you. I think at this point we can turn it back over to you, Teresa, and thank you all very much for your connectedness this morning and also for the space to have this conversation.
And we so appreciate you being willing to have this dialogue with us this morning and letting us listen in. Absolutely amazing, ladies. Thank you so much.
Thank you.